Mr. President, Minister Zulu, colleagues in business, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to this BLSA and SMME Fund joint event. Mr. President, our country has got many problems, many challenges. Over the last 4 years, 3-4 years, business has tried to join the search for solutions within the context of what we can do in addressing the socio-political, socio-economic challenges that face our country. As business, we have started to participate in seeking solutions to address issues of unemployment, inequality, and poverty. This event is but one of those little efforts that business is making in the search for these solutions. Faced with a prospect of a sovereign downgrade in 2016, business asked the incoming Minister of Finance at the time, Mr. Pravin Gordhan, what was he going to do to try and avoid a rating downgrade? Minister Gordhan turned the question around and said, what is it that business think he should do less of or more of? But the second question was, what is it that business was going to do? So the CEO initiative was born then and focused on 4 areas, one of which was raising fund to support small and medium enterprise. In a space of 2 months, business leaders pledged to contribute about 1.5 billion to contribute to a fund to start to address this. In 2017, BLSA, launching their strategy, went to Alexandra and committed that at the end of their term in 3 years' time, they would want to see coming out of Alexandra at least 10 businesses. So today, having been engaged with the issue of inclusive growth in addressing job creation and looking for solutions, we have found that funding is but one. The bigger challenge is opportunities that small entrepreneurs would need to supply big business. So we are here today, Mr. President, and thank you for agreeing to come and launch these initiatives, but also to get an update of where the SMME Fund has gone to. So mine was to welcome you here, Mr. President, and welcome your guests. And thanks to Adrienne for hosting us here at this state-of-the-art futuristic building at Discovery. Thank you very much. So without much waste of time, I would now like to ask that we all stick within time. We've promised the President that he will be at his next meeting at the appointed time. So the President would leave us just before 9. By that time, all of you on the agenda would have finished speaking. Thank you very much. Can I ask you, Adrienne, to come?
Mr. President, great honor to have you, Minister Zulu. Welcome, and really thank you for the time. It's a real honor for us at Discovery as well to host you in our head office. As Jabu has said, the SME Fund, to an extent, it's an update. We've been around for some time, but it is important just to frame it, and I'll give you some insight into our thinking, and then obviously Ketsa, our CEO, will give you, I think, deeper dive into the actual allocation of funds and kind of the deep strategies in that. But maybe at the outset to make the point that the focus of the fund was a couple of years ago around building this fund that would really spur job creation. To an extent, we had a very slow start. It's taken us literally a year and a half to get to a point where we felt confident to start moving very quickly. And I think we had a very ambiguous start as to what the mandate should be, etc. From that, I think we have moved quickly, and there was a very strong feeling within the fund that we shouldn't be launching so much until we had actually done quite a bit of work. And I think you'll see, hopefully, there's been very good traction in the process of the fund. Let me, at the outset, just say this fund is about job creation. It's about spurring entrepreneurship. It's about creating and helping the growth of black business, black entrepreneurship. But there's been a number of philosophical decisions we've made over the formation of the fund. The first is that we've focused on a fund-to-fund approach as opposed to a direct investing approach. It's just not practical for us to invest directly. There are great fund managers out there. We can help build black fund managers, and so we focused on a fund-to-funds approach. There's a lot of money chasing private equity, and in many cases replacement capital. So you'll see from Ketsa's presentation, we focused on a hybrid approach. There's a real need for a venture capital industry. We just don't have it here. And if the SME Fund can help create that, that will be a very powerful thing. So this is a hybrid model. Third point, SMEs. We obviously are focusing on a certain size of SMEs, but at the same time, the mandate is about trying to build some really big black businesses if we can. And we think that's an important aspect of this. On the demographics, we originally had a very complicated set of ideas as how we would aid transformation. We focused now on a very simple grid. 50% of the funds, we hope to go to black business, 25 to Indian, 25 to white. That's kind of the focus we went on, and it's based on a whole lot of research that Ketsa and the team did do and what we felt was practical. And then finally, I'll touch on the ecosystem, trying to use the unique structure of the fund to really build bigger businesses if we can. I'll touch on that later, this idea of a CEO circle. First point to make is I think we have a very good governance structure. There's a very strong board. The board is largely as it was at the outset. We lost 2 members over the time, Dr. Dan Magila and Chris Tabisa, just circumstantial issues obviously emerged. The board, though, other than that, has stayed very much as we started, and over time we may strengthen that board. Second point, we have a very strong investment committee chaired by Michael Jordan, excellent people on the committee with deep domain experience. And then finally, I think we have a very strong team in the fund itself, now run CEO Ketso. I think the team is doing a great job. The whole collective, I think, is diverse, deep domain experience, diverse by gender, by race, by life experience. So the ecosystem I think we built is very, very strong. Ketsa will talk about the actual investments made to date and the approach we're taking, but just to amplify on the point earlier on the right-hand side of the chart, we see 3 areas. It's a hybrid approach. We are investing in impact and supporting structures to facilitate the way to create job creation and entrepreneurship, and you'll hear more about that. There's a strong focus on venture capital, and there's a number of fund managers in that space who are trying to seed and help. And then important is a focus on growth investments. Sorry, this is jumping around. I'm not sure why. Important point to make is already we've committed 725 million of the potential 1.4 billion to be invested. So you'll hear a bit later that we've already committed half of the money, and I think the balance will be done by August this year. So we are moving, I think, very, very quickly. On the issue of, one last point, a critical point on the left-hand side of the chart. Obviously, we will focus on SMEs, but there is a very strong desire for the fund to generate large black businesses. If we can do that, we think that will be a very important, not just symbolic, but an important real step in creating entrepreneurship at that scale. It's very hard to do. So we've kind of set a success factor. In 10 years, can we build 10 significant black businesses, 500 million in revenue or more if we can achieve that? Can we build and scale 200 black SMEs? And can we bring out this 5 world-class entrepreneurs? I mean, that's what we'd like to do. So there's kind of a hybrid approach at both ends of the scale, and we're hoping we can achieve it. On the issue of creating large businesses, talking to the president earlier, it's not an easy thing to do. I think everyone knows that to start a business is hard anyway. It's an existential complexity. It's hard to start, it's hard to scale, it's hard to succeed. To get it to really scale is difficult. I mean, it's troubling if you look at the data that we are not getting larger numbers of businesses coming through. While the JSE's market cap is growing over time, you can see that in fact over the last 10 years, the number of companies listed has declined. So the number of companies delisting has exceeded the number of companies listing. You look at the small exchanges, the same thing happens. So we're getting kind of a polarization, large, big companies that are very successful, difficult to create large companies that come through and have that kind of potential going forward. So we really have a substantial problem. But I wanted to put you, before I hand over to Ketso, there is quite a unique opportunity in the SME fund and its ecosystem. If you have a look at the ecosystem, you will see earlier you've got the fund in the middle, you'll see a bit later, and 3 pillars: venture capital, growth, and impact, and underneath them, a range of fund managers. So that's kind of the obvious structure we've created. But one of the fundamental things we have that no other fund has is sitting above it: our shareholders, the largest and best companies in the country. And that provides a unique ability to create an ecosystem that really allows us to build businesses of scale. So what we're trying to do today is launch this idea of a CEO circle, getting all of the CEOs in our shareholder group to help commit to this process. Very simply put, to scale a company, you need funding. We have that in the SME fund and elsewhere in the environment. We need mentoring, and we need access to markets. If we can get all 3 of those to work very well for the right companies, we believe we can scale. So let me say to you what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is create a system where if we come across a great company, and we're going to define that in a moment, that has potential to scale, what we would like to do is, if they need funding, it's in that ecosystem, but we would like to bring them to our shareholders, match the appropriate company with the appropriate set of shareholder companies, and ask the CEO to commit to helping to promote that organization in their supply chain. This is not a contractual obligation. It's not if they don't meet the standards, that's fine. So these have to be great companies, but simply asking a top-down referral from our shareholders into these big corporates. I've seen in my own experience, it makes a big difference when things come top-down and they're endorsed and they're sponsored. At the same time, we're asking CEOs to help us find mentors in their company that can help these companies scale. So the idea we have here is we would like to siphon through many companies through a process. Those that meet this kind of stamp of approval, we'd like to then bring to our shareholders and ask them to promote and support and see if we can get traction in that process. I think if we get that right, there are 2 kind of almost distribution channels for this. The one obvious one is at the bottom, as you can see. In the process of doing our business, we're going to come across great companies. We're going to bring them up. But the other thing that our research has shown, and speaking to many of you, is that in the supply chains of big corporates, there are great companies, great black companies that are developing, but they often can't wean themselves off just the one large corporate. So put it into our funnel, we can then take them to the other companies and sponsor them in some way, mentor them. So we see a kind of dual process here using the unique shareholding base. We debated this many times, and it sounds kind of obvious, but it's not. You know, I will tell you anecdotally that if a fund manager brings us a fund at Discovery, we have no reason to support them above our existing set of suppliers. Here we're saying that an SME fund is national service. We've made a collective commitment to build this environment. And therefore, we're kind of almost saying if we bring you a company with a stamp on its back that it's been through the process, we're asking, would you help us do that? So we've been speaking to a number of CEOs. I've spoken to 10 top CEOs who really have given their absolute commitment to this. I'm really asking today that you do the same as CEOs of the companies. It's not a contractual obligation. It's a commitment, in a sense, for national service. We have to build 10 great companies if we can. We've done a lot of work on the search and selection, so we're not going to bring forward companies that don't meet standards. We're working very closely with Endeavour. I think they are the gold standard about search and selection and understanding the space. So crudely, our criteria we've set are companies that are already successful, 20% growth rate per year for 5 years, annual turnover of at least 50 million. We hope, we're not saying these are absolutely cast in stone, but we're trying to create some kind of relevant framework that we can work on. As these companies come through, we can use the Endeavour structure to select and help them in a sense. And then once they're through, we're going to bring them forward. And that's the idea. So we're not going to bring forward companies we think don't merit that promotion, that mentoring, etc. So My ask of you today is, I think you'll see through Ketsa's presentation, a lot of work done on the funding, but my ask today is to help us build this ecosystem. We want to move very, very quickly. What we would like by the 12th of April, so just in a few weeks' time, is a list from you as to, in your supply chain, who do you think would meet those criteria? Just give them to us so we can now start working with them. By the third quarter, we'd like to get the mentor process in place in the correct companies, and by the third quarter, we're going to start approaching, hopefully with your support, procurement officers in the companies to help us actually promote and get these companies to scale. We'll see how this thing plays out. It's going to have a number of cycles. We'll go through them. We're not suggesting hundreds of companies, a small handful carefully chosen, and we're hoping in that process we can generate 10 black companies of real scale, 500 million revenue, and help them really scale into something substantial. If we get the ecosystem to work well together with the stuff at the low end, the small SME space, with the stuff you see what Ketso is doing, I think we can create systemic change. So a lot has been done. I'm going to hand over to Ketso to give you the real meat of what is going on the ground. Thank you very much for this.
There's one more slide.
Yeah, there'll be.
Thank you, Adrian. As you can see on the slide that's up there, we have committed 725 million of the 1.25 billion of the fund that's investable. We have a pipeline of deals that are likely to be concluded by August, which means the full fund will be committed by the end of August this year. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the three categories so that you get a feel for what we're trying to do and why we're doing it. So in the growth space, one of the big challenges in South Africa is that most of the private equity activity is replacement capital. So somebody is buying somebody else's shares. That doesn't create new growth. So we've got a simple definition in our growth section, which is that we want our capital to be going into fast-growing companies that can be 3 to 5 times their current size, but growth capital. So people that are looking to build a new plant, people that are looking to formalize their business, people that are looking to open new stores, or whatever the particular needs are. And we'd like to see at the end of the investment process that the business has grown sort of 3 to 5 times. So that's a very concrete sort of objective in the growth category. We are putting a lot of time and effort into identifying the fund managers in that particular space who can deliver that outcome. The second category is the impact and support area. And here we are being quite eclectic. We're doing very different things. And in each of the things we're doing, we're trying to do something which is catalytic and which sets an example either for us or somebody else to follow and try and crowd in a lot more capital. So I'm not gonna bore you with all the details. I'll give you the two useful examples. One is we've invested 100 million rands in a company called Spartan. Spartan has a 14-year track record of lending to SMEs where banks and other lending institutions have not been able to understand the risk adequately and be able to lend against the limited amount of security that might be available in those SMEs. So there's an opportunity to keep those businesses alive. And Spartan has been doing it really, really well for a long time. And we decided to put in 100 million, but subordinate our money, meaning we are standing last in the queue, which means he will be able to borrow 500 million rands against our 100 million rands. And so he'll be lending out 600 million. So leveraging our 100 into 600 into a really important space, we think that over the 8-year term of our deal with Spartan, we will impact hundreds of SMEs, and the majority of them will be black-owned. So that's one very tangible example. The second one, and we are using the second example not because I'm trying to suck up to the president, but in black umbrellas, we found a really interesting opportunity to test a completely new idea. So Black Umbrellas is an incubator. Very small businesses come out of that incubator, and they desperately need money. And people just look at their balance sheet and their track record, and they say, no. Whereas Spartan can look at those balance sheets in a very creative way and be willing to take the kinds of risks to lend to those Black Umbrella incubator businesses. They have a track record. They've already done a number of those. And so we said to Spartan, we will provide a 5 million rand first loss guarantee against which you must lend 50 million. So we're willing to lose the first 5, but you must get 45 more to lend against it. Now, my view is that at the end, we'll either lose the 5 million, or in fact, we won't lose anything. But one of the things missing in the financing sort of environment in South Africa, and particularly from government, is the willingness to put up these first loss positions. So we thought we're a small fund, we'll do it on a small scale, we'll prove the idea works, and then hopefully encourage a lot of people to rush through the same door. So that's our second category. Our last category, as Adrian pointed out, venture capital. So economies grow because of innovation and technological advancement. We've seen that the world over. And in venture capital, you bring together these two things. You bring together innovation and scientific and technical innovation. And so we want to use our limited fund to catalyze the venture capital space. Just to give you a point to talk about at your next dinner party. In America last year, for the financial year, they invested $82 billion in venture capital. In South Africa last year, we did $70 million. So on average in America, every day, including weekends, they invest $240 million, or 3.2 times what we do in a year. So every day in Silicon Valley, before lunch, they've invested what we invest in a year. That tells you how small we are. And as Adrian was saying, just with our limited activity, our 3 commitments and 2 to come, we will, by August this year, be the largest institutional investor in venture capital in South Africa. I mean, that's not us showing off. That's telling you how small the industry is. And that if we want to scale this up, then everywhere in the world where it has worked successfully, it's been a collaboration between the public and the private sector. And there are many sterling examples all over the world of people that have broken through by first creating 20 to 30 venture capital funds. If you don't have 20 to 30, you don't have an ecosystem that allows the thing to grow. So through our efforts, we will create the first 5 or 6 and help another 4 or 5. So we'll be able to get to roughly a 10 number with our limited resources, and then hopefully we can scale it up from there. I'm just going to talk about one of the venture capital funds, because everybody assumes these things are software and systems and apps. The one we've prioritized and given money to is called Savant, and they're a Cape Town-based venture capital fund that's been around for 14 years, and they work with hardware. So they work with people who invent things and help them commercialize it. Now, the reason we chose them is that one of the second areas of venture capital we want to focus on has got to do with this science and technological innovation. So South Africa ranks really well in terms of how much of money does government spend on academic and research at our science councils. So this year, that will be about 10 billion rand. We also do equally well in how many of those PhD students and postdoctoral students are able to convert their research into a journal article. So again, we have our fair share. Where this process falls over and pretty much dies is converting that IP, that intellectual property, into businesses. So in the 8-year period between 2008 and 2014, South Africa spent about 46 billion on the research side. We wrote many articles, but we created, not successful, we just started 45 businesses coming out of that IP. So the cost of starting a business in that space is R1 billion a business. Now that is unacceptable, to anybody. So one of the things we want to do in our venture capital allocation is we will partner with either one of the scientific councils or a bunch of universities who have technology transfer offices and create a fund that will look at commercializing our IP. And the inspiration for what we are doing comes from Oxford University. 3 years ago, Oxford took 25% of its total IP, put it into a private company, got Temasek, Tencent, and every other big investor you can think of in the world to put together a fund of 600 million pounds. And in the short time that this fund has existed, where the private investment mindset works with the professor from Oxford and the management capability of the team, they've commercialized 63 pieces of IP and created 63 companies. So our track record of converting IP to companies in South Africa is shockingly bad, And that's one of the sort of catalytic things that we think we'll be able to do with the fund. So on that note, that's how far we've gotten in the venture capital space. Other than working with the universities, we're also about to launch South Africa's first biotech fund. Biotech is now the second largest recipient of venture capital in America and globally. And we are way behind on that journey. So we want to create the first small biotech fund, and then hopefully what we've done is laid a solid foundation. And I'm sure the minister is going to be very, very happy to partner with us going forward to grow this thing. Thank you very much.
Eminence, Excellencies, most distinguished participants. So on the 23rd of August 2017, in the height of state capture, we were responding to the numbers that we were seeing because none of us had actually bothered to quantify the impact of this state capture. If one accepts that our GDP is about 4.9 trillion, the piece of work that we are doing says in just the last 4 years, we have wasted about 1.5 trillion. This is 2/3 of the 1.8 trillion that we collect from South African revenue services in 4 years. In 10 years, we estimate that we have been siphoning off about 100 billion per annum. That's why the Minister of Finance says it's 9 wasted years. So when you look at the proportion of black ownership of this economy with an expanded definition, including pension funds, labor investment companies, the black ownership of the JSE is about 20 percentage points. The direct ownership is about 3. You compare our performance with our BRICS counterparts, SMEs create up to 60% of new jobs. In South Africa, less than 15. If this is not arrested, it might lead to social instability because the elements that were present in Libya during the Arab Spring are here and immediate. So in responding to that, we then said we'll have a contract directly with South Africans where we committed 6 things. One of those was we are going to invest in small and medium enterprises. Secondly, we said we are going to invest in black executives so that this economy is broadly reflective of the demographics. The second thing that we did, we said we are going to take an anti-corruption oath, which we called the Integrity Pledge. Out of that, we created an integrity fund to root out and defeat the state capture. Because nothing we do will ever equal what is leaking out of the bottom of this barrel. We now are creating the Integrity Hub, whose job it is to determine the correct narrative we should be having as a people with great natural endowments. So what we have this morning is an amalgam of a number of initiatives. So 5 years ago, we went to the president, to the World Economic Forum. We responded with the SMME fund. BLSA, this organization that was founded in 1960, launched the BLSA Connect. Its sole intention is simply to link black SMEs with the supply chain of these big companies. 88 CEOs, members of BLSA, 53 of them are responsible for more than half the GDP of this country. In the room here, we also have Harambe and Africa Tycoon, Nicola Kalumbi, who says, let's make these kids job ready because unemployment of 53% amongst our youth is really unsustainable. Africa Tycoon says, we go to Diepsloot, Orange Farm, the most neglected of our communities. We make them job ready, whilst Harambee can boast up to 500,000 of these that have been made job ready. Africa Tycoon says about 200,000 of them in the most poor of the poorest of communities will also be job ready. They operate in 3 overseas markets, and Mark Labner is representing this. So that when the president says, we went to the job summit, the investment summit, we continue the conversation that we had on Tuesday with the Hellenic, Italian, and Portuguese community about grabbing this economy by the scruff of its neck, with business leading on these 6 commitments, that we can change the patterns of ownership of this country, probably in the next 5 years, impactful in the next 10 years, we can then see what we have done. So today, Adrian Goh stands as one of these CEOs to say, we're asking you to pledge to open up your supply chains so that these companies can have access to this supply chain, because the piece of work that we're doing at BLSA, out of the 5 biggest challenges facing SMEs, we left micro out. Number 5 only is finance. Number 1 is access to market. And we genuinely believe that would have been absolutely impactful if we did only that. Lastly, we are then saying, as BLSA, moving forward, we'll be working with all the social partners. That's why we went to Magaliesburg with COSATU. We went to Birchwood with the South African Communist Party to say there's no country in the world that has ever succeeded with the type of experiment that we're doing without all social partners putting their shoulders to the wheel in supporting and emboldening the initiatives of the Presidential Special Investment Envoys to raise 100 billion. All of us must be doing our piece. The US of A, after the Civil War, started with a New Deal, D. Eisenhower. In Europe, they came up with the big Marshall Plan. We had our own Marshall Plan, Reconstruction and Development Program, that in 3 years we jettisoned. We came up with GEAR. Since then, it became an alphabet soup. And we're not very specific, deliberate, conscious, and purposeful about what type of economy that we want. It took 20 years for West Germany and East Germany to create one prosperous Germany. When we were in the snaking queues on the 27th of April 1994, Rwanda was going through the most painful genocide. In 20 years, their buses have free Wi-Fi. Of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world, 7 of them are in Africa. Rwanda is one of them, of a small base. And yet today, when they speak, they are no longer Hutus and Tutsis, only Rwandans. Just like in Angola, when they speak, they say, after Savimbi died. When the Russian says, after the 1917 revolution, we submit as BLSA that we want our business people and taxi drivers, that when they speak, they say, with the advent of the new dawn, when we're gifted on the 19th of December 2017, not with our second chance, but our last chance. Because if we mess this one up, we'll be just another failed African country. Mr. President.
Mr. President, this was never meant to be a forum where we come and complain about this red tape, this government is not doing this. What Bonang was doing with the statistics that is given us was the shock treatment that this country needs, to always be factual, empirical with our solutions. So thanks for that, and Ketso and Adrian have showed what is it that we are as business doing about the problems that Bonang has so eloquently explained. So Mr. President, naba bantu bakho bakumamele, thetha nabo.
Thank you, Jabu. Thank you, Adrian and Bonang and the entire leadership of business. It's really wonderful to be here because I see this as a festival of some sort. There's going to be a jazz festival soon in Cape Town. I'm not going, but I think I've come to the real most wonderful festival, a festival of people who have come together to create real value and to address a challenge and a problem that we're facing in our country. And in that regard, I really want to honor you and thank you for this wonderful initiative. When it started, we knew that it would be successful, but now it's proving to be much more impactful than we had thought. So I see this as a celebration of the joint effort that you have put together as business to create a fund like this, because this is where it really, really, truly matters. I've been reading a book, I've just started reading it, by Mariana Mazzucato. She's a professor in the UK, and she writes, title of her book is The Entrepreneurial State. And she seeks to debunk certain myths about the public sector and the private sector, but she goes to great lengths to explain how a state needs to be entrepreneurial and how, for instance, the US government has been thoroughly entrepreneurial in that it created Silicon Valley. And many people often think that Silicon Valley was the creation of great business leaders. It was the government that sparked it off. And it goes on to say that even a number of companies, you know, Amazon and Google and all of those, they were really funded by the government as they got started, and some of them lost a lot of money. Even our own countryman, Elon Musk, his company was hugely funded by the government. Now, she talks about how a state can be entrepreneurial. But I think here we have the opportunity to rewrite her book and to write her book differently and say the entrepreneurial business and state of South Africa, where we can get the state and business to collaborate and work together to create world-class businesses and to support the various smaller businesses and make them really outstanding businesses. And many of you who are here, and I've seen a number of usual suspects around here who don't need to be rounded up, who need to be applauded for the many efforts that we are involved in, right from Harambe and a whole number of others. These are joint efforts. And as you were saying, it's creating an ecosystem, and I see this, it was Adrian who spoke about ecosystem. It's an ecosystem that is just broader than just getting funders. It's an ecosystem that brings together those entities that will create that impact process that is required. So for me, this is a real celebration to thank you all for this great initiative. I had been wanting to hear this report for quite a while, Adrian, and you came at the right time to present this report and to demonstrate or show what you have created here. Because what we are seeking to do is to address the challenges that our country faces. The challenges are the unemployment, which is huge, but even as we have unemployment, we already know that there are certain initiatives that we can embark upon that can address the unemployment challenge. And some of those have to do with what government must do. And I welcome the insistence from a number of colleagues who are here, like Bonang, Stephen Kosev, and many others, who keep on saying remove the impediments, remove the hurdles that the economy has in as far as either the spectrum, visas, and all that. And we've been in deep collaboration with all of you. to try and address those, and we are making success. But at the same time, it was to launch this very ambitious fundraising investment drive, rather, when we appointed 4 envoys. When we started off, some people thought we had smoked something, but it is beginning to pay off. And later this year, we will hold our second investment conference, which will be bigger and where we are going to be seeking to raise even bigger funds. And when those funds start flowing into the country, they will lead to a continuous growth of our economy. But you are operating at a level where it matters most. Matters most in that it is the small and medium enterprises that really create the jobs that we need. It's no longer going to be your big mega Anglo-American type big factories and big mines that are going to create the most of the jobs. It is the small, medium enterprises that you are targeting, and that's precisely where we would like to keep your focus on. And at the same time, the innovation that you have added, that you want to create a number of those black-led, owned and managed companies that are going to be big and world-class. And I like the focus on the big ones as well as on the medium and small ones, and you head them all in the right direction. From the government point of view, we decided some time ago that we needed to create black industrialists. And our program of creating black industrialists is bearing fruit. We already have quite a number of industrialists who are already in the market and operating. And these are people who are dirtying their hands, getting into factory situations and creating things that are saleable. And they are not rent seekers. They are not just tenderpreneurs. They are real business people. And those are the types of people that we want you to also keep a focus on. But at the same time, from a government point of view, we are also getting into much bigger into the incubation space. When we announced the stimulus package, we said we want now to focus on the growth of township economies as well as the rural areas, so that our townships and our rural areas should no longer just be dormitories where people just go and sleep, wake up, get into a train, get stuck for 3 hours like I did the other time. We want them to be areas where business is conducted. And I would therefore also want to get your gaze to move to the townships and to the rural areas where there's the greatest need for support, for assistance. And so what I like also about what you are presenting here is that you are mixing both funding as well as mentoring, as well as incubation with all the partners that you have amassed. And that is the right approach to growing black-owned businesses by obviously Africans, colors, and Indians, as well as a number of other young white South Africans who also need to be supported. What I also appreciate is the focus on research, or your connection with the research institutions and universities as well. That, for me, is where the real Rembrandts are hidden in the attic. And you need to go and get those Rembrandts out of that attic and get them to bring whatever they have innovated and created into the market space. So I think with this initiative, we are indeed in a good space. But what I also appreciate is the fact that you're seeking to create a broader ecosystem. And this is where we would like companies to come to the party through their value chains, their procurement systems, because this is where we open up the economy for new participants, participants who are able, by the way, who will have been tried and tested through the rigorous system that this initiative is going to be able to yield. And that's exactly where we're then able to get companies that were previously prevented from getting into various procurement spaces, value chain spaces, to get involved. I appreciate what is also being done by a number of other companies. I have heard of the stories of how South African breweries, for instance, goes out into the farming areas and finds the old mamas and the old papas and helps them to farm the barley and the millet and all the ingredients that they need. Helps them with funding, helps them with the way without all to produce those ingredients that they need in their products. And that is broadening the ecosystem that is necessary. And focus, Ketso, on young people, for me, is going to be one of the defining features of what you will do. We need to focus on young people and give them the enabling environment. We as a government want to create these incubation centers where we draw in young people. Young people are immensely capable, and all they ever need is an environment in which they can thrive. I had occasion to be in Mexico some 3-4 years ago, and I met these teachers in Mexico, from Canada rather, and we were talking just about the Internet of Things and all that, and they told me that they are now teaching coding at age 2 in their schools. Age 2, and I was really shocked to hear that. And they say, you enable these young children at age 2, age 3 into a world of technology, you will see exactly what they are capable of. When I went to see King Zwelithini in KZN, we landed in the army helicopter, and an old woman comes to greet me. She wanted to shake my hand and get me to hug her, which I do so liberally these days. But then she wanted to take a photograph. And she tried to work on a cell phone. And she had her 2.5-year-old granddaughter. The granddaughter immediately took the cell phone from her, repositioned the cell phone, and took a photograph. And I was amazed that this 2.5-year-old young girl knows how to do this. So all we need to do is to give them the tools, to give them the capability, and to create the environment for young people to be able to thrive. And through what you are creating here, I'm sure that as it grows, as it gets more and more support, we will be able to do that. The other area of focus is to also focus on women-owned and led businesses. And we say this advisedly because the women in our country, particularly black women, suffered the triple oppression syndrome, much more than us men. They were oppressed because they were black, they were women, and there was a patriarchal type of a system that kept them down. And we need to focus on them and uplift them so that women can come and play their rightful role. So I would like to suggest that even as you do so, even as you carve out all those percentages, you should leave some percentage for the involvement of women. Even if you go to 50%, which is the norm now. In the party that I lead, everything that we do, everything that we touch, we know it's got to be 50%. And even as I will put my cabinet together after the elections, which we hope we're going to win, which we know we're going to win, I have to seek to create that balance. And creating that balance is not difficult because there are immensely capable women in South Africa, and all we need to do is to give them that great opportunity for them to come into their own. So if your fund, Adrian and Ketso, Jabu and Bonang, if your fund can focus on those issues, the youth, the women, the townships, as well as the rural areas, go and find those gems. And as you do so, yes, go to the young people, because some of them are the real Rembrandts that are hidden in the attic. Let's bring them to market and help them. And if we can do that, we can then create a really good example of what we are capable of. Because there are quite a number of entrepreneurs in our country who are rearing to go, who would like to move ahead. We saw, and you were a little bit shy, I saw about mentioning black umbrellas. When I was still in the private sector, we created this business incubation entity, which we call Black Umbrellas, and we have seen it grow by leaps and bounds. It's able to get your small SMMEs, what you and I would regard as, the times that will fail, after 6 months or so. And some of them are usually impressive. There's just one woman and man, husband and wife rather, company. They started a few years ago, and they were a non-entity of a company. And today, they employ well over 1,000 people, and their turnover is about 150 million, and their net asset value, or let me say, their profit after tax is around 20% of what their turnover is, which is a really successful business. To find a business that did not exist a few years ago, that has now been incubated, made successful, and now is flying on its own. And flying on its own because it has been allowed to be part of the ecosystem, the value chain, the procurement process that big companies are able to create. So I want to end by saying, as I have to run, the appeal that you're making to other companies to be part of this, I want to endorse that. I want to endorse that in the Tumamina spirit. We need a Tumamina spirit also in the private sector, where the private sector will bring in their strength, their funds, their capabilities, their procurement systems and everything. Bring that to bear so that they can be tumored, they can be sent to try and create a much broader ecosystem that will bring more and more of our compatriots into this process. This is a great opportunity that we have, all of us as South Africans. I'm proud that this initiative has taken off because it is pregnant with enormous potential and capabilities which we need to strengthen. And all of us, remember my book with Mariana Mazzucato, where we create or rewrite a book, not an entrepreneurial state, but the entrepreneurial business and state of South Africa. This is the opportunity that we have, particularly as we move into the new dawn, into the new period that we are about to explode in. This is the time that South Africa has been waiting for, and the celebration that I wanted to also endorse is that we've created a very good system of cooperation between government and business. And it's working, it's practical. It has gone beyond, it has just gone beyond platform statements. It has gone just beyond making speeches and all that. This is the practical effect. So I appeal to all companies that are here and beyond to support this initiative, to come in. They've already spent half of the amount of money that they had started raising. It's now going to run out. Knowing Ketso as I do, he's going to spend all that money in no time. So he's going to need more money. So let's support this initiative and bring more money and bring more companies in to be of assistance. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, there was an interesting study that was done in 2017 by a company called FinFind. The study was termed the SMME Access to Finance Report, and it was sponsored by the SMME Fund. When I went through that study, what surprised me was that the full-time jobs created by just the medium enterprises in the SMME, which are only 3% of that cohort, is 39%. Imagine if we were to double that number to 6%, 200% increase to 9%, what the impact would be on unemployment, on poverty, and subsequently inequality in this country. Colleagues, it can only be big business that drives and supports SMMEs. Because if not big business, then who? Because to whom that more is given, much is expected. So as big businesses, we ought to be doing more to support in changing the economic trajectory of this country. And I think we've already agreed as a country that the growth that is envisioned can only come from the deliberate intention and focus on the support of SMMEs, and black SMMEs in particular. The same study, Mr. President, says that in this SMME cohort, 66% of those enterprises are black, 19% are white, 10% are colored, and 5% are Indian. So you see that until we have touched and focused on black SMMEs, we haven't even touched the surface. So the focus, therefore, so I like it, Adrian, that the SMME Fund actually has put aside 50% on black SMMEs. So the same way that the BLSA Connect's focus is on black SMMEs, so that we open the preferential procurement opportunities of these organizations so that black SMMEs can benefit. Because I think we agree that as big business, we have reached our plateau in terms of creating jobs. So it can only be SMMEs and black SMMEs in particular that are actually going to create the shift, the impact, and the scale that we want to see in this country in terms of growing our economy. The SMME Fund is providing the capital that is much needed by these businesses. And as the BLSA Connect, we are saying to our BLSA member companies, please open your supply chain by providing preferential procurement opportunities to these companies. And ESD is merely an enabler. So the focus of BLSA Connect is preferential procurement, and ESD is an enabler. So I think, colleagues, we have to come to the realization and agree that black SMMEs in this country cannot continue to be subjected to perpetual training without graduation. So ESD is not the end game. Because just like BEE, ESD is a tactic. The strategy and the grand plan is transformation and therefore preferential procurement. And until we actually give preferential procurement opportunities to these black SMMEs, then we are not going to achieve what we want to achieve. I think let me take this opportunity and thank our founding members of BLSA Connect, Mr. Vasinaidu, Nedbank, thank you very much. Adrian's Gauze Discovery, thank you very much for your support. Grant Bodley's Dimension Data, and Gerifori's Capitec. And Mr. President, as business, we cannot thank you enough for your continued support and faith in the business community. We cannot thank you enough for the endorsement in these opportunities and in these platform and vehicles that we create. And I think as Bonang, my boss, says that I think we realize as business that we have been given not just another opportunity, but the final opportunity to actually do what we need to do to start making the shifts and the impact that business and only business can make. Because the purpose of business as the only social partner with a disproportionate voice and disproportionate power is to indeed create these opportunities, and government merely exists to ensure that they create a conducive environment within which we can operate to create these opportunities. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our morning. We've promised the President that we're only going to keep this to an hour, and as disciplined cadres of business, we are going to do exactly that. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. President. Thank you again, once again. Thank you.